Make rituals great again. I'm A. Salomon and I love ritual monsters in Yu-Gi-Oh! But as a summoning mechanic, it has never been well balanced. On one end, we have the pile of memes printed during the Dual Monsters era, and on the other, we have a hyper-consistent deck in the form of Drytrons. Ritual summoning has had long-standing issues when contrasted with the meta. It has always required gathering the ritual monster, the ritual spell, and a ritual tribute, which makes ritual decks be unable to compete with meta decks that can combo with their one-card starters. With Konami releasing the new ritual archetype Mikanko in August 2022, I want to take a deep dive at what makes a good ritual archetype, the trends that Konami has shown in releasing ritual monsters and spells, and my expectations on what Mikanko as a ritual archetype would do.
You get nothing! You lose! Good day, sir!
In a bid to support my claims in this video, I have catalogued every single ritual monster and every single spell or trap that facilitates summoning of ritual monsters. This includes a breakdown of the consistency and effects of each card catalogue. To be open to scrutiny, I have placed a Google Drive link to the Excel file in the description below.
What makes me a good demo man? If I were a bad demo man, I wouldn't be sitting here discussing it with you now, would I?
To understand what makes a good ritual archetype, we first need to know what archetypes are good. Thankfully for the ritual summoning mechanic, this is incredibly easy. Now, I would like you to just take a few seconds to think of a few ritual monsters or archetypes. Off the top of your head, you would probably have just thought of Drytron, Necros, Illusion of Chaos, Drytron, Megaliths, Cyber Angel Ben 10, and maybe a wild card like Incantations, Libromancer, or even Drytron. It may surprise you that there are actually 115 ritual monsters and not just the 5 that you see in Master Duel. These cards stand out from the rest either due to recency bias, such as Libromancer or Illusion of Chaos, or due to the PTSD you got from Master Duel. The one line that seems to tie all of these cards together is consistency. Every single ritual monster or archetype I mentioned facilitates searching of combo pieces, ritual monsters, or ritual spells. When you consider consistency for ritual decks, you may start to consider pre-preparation of Rites, or pre-prep for short. It is a card that allows you to search for 2 cards from your deck, 1 ritual spell and 1 ritual monster mentioned on the ritual spell. It becomes frustrating when you open a hand filled with ritual monsters or ritual spells but end up missing out the other half. Pre-prep attempts to alleviate this problem by allowing you to search both of them at once, only requiring you to worry about the tribute.
Hey, thanks, Doc. I healed the man who will kill you.
While this may be good on paper, did you realize that the list of ritual monsters I mentioned earlier, except for Libromancers, cannot use pre-prep? No ritual deck has reached meta status since the release of pre-prep in 2016, until 2020 when Drytrons showed up. Initially, I approached this video thinking that pre-prep was the best card for ritual archetypes. However, as I continued cataloging, I noticed the opposite. I would think that the existence of pre-prep actively hurts the consistency of ritual archetypes that use it instead of helping them.
Come over here! I promise I will heal you!
To describe ritual decks being actively hindered by their access to pre-prep, I would like to coin the phrase, the curse of pre-prep. It seems counterintuitive that pre-prep would hinder consistency of ritual decks, but it is likely due to the design philosophy of Konami. If they would allow the ritual monster to have access to pre-prep, it is likely that the ritual monster is not part of an archetype, or that Konami has given limited or no searching ability to the archetype. As an example, anyone who tried playing Vendread before Scarf Vendread was announced can testify how inconsistent the deck was and how reliant it was on pre-prep to get started, having to pray for a ritual spell in their opening hand because searching Vendread spells and traps was not a thing yet.
Where are they?
Killing is making a choice.
Another example is Nephis. The deck is unable to search for Nephis spells and traps until their next standby phase when Decipher of Nephis was destroyed by an effect. The deck is still currently heavily reliant on pre-prep to get started. Whereas if a ritual monster is not given access to pre-prep, it is likely part of an archetype that is capable of searching for its own ritual spells and ritual monsters easily. A clear example is Drytrons, where each level 1 monster would either search cards or draw cards. Drytrons work this way as it was designed as a ritual engine much like incantations, but much better as it takes advantage of Cyber Angel Band 10 not being once per turn, and allowing machine monsters without levels to be used as tributes.
He does exactly what I do, but better.
While Herald of Perfection and Ultimateness are able to use pre-prep, Drytron decklists often do not consider their respective ritual spells, with their current success in the metagame still attributable to Drytrons as an engine.
Where's the lamb sauce?
Another example is Megaliths, which does not have a ritual spell at all. It works well as it cycles through their searches multiple times in the first turn to build their board.
Just need a...
Where's the lamb sauce?
However, I have a question for you. Libromancer has both access to pre-prep and has strong searching capabilities in Archetype. So, why hasn't it reached top meta status yet? The answer is that it sucks. The archetype is currently focused on churning out Doombroker for a negate, and is common not to even use the ritual spell as it is not reusable like their field spell. The two ritual monsters that would have been searchable with pre-prep are seeing nearly no usage due to their underwhelming effects. It is a definite upside that Libromancers as a deck can summon many monsters without using its normal summon, allowing the deck to put up boards like many TCG decklists would show. But if you are going to put up a board consisting of the usual Artifact, Deckda and Scythe Lock, you are probably better off playing another deck which can do that and more. But A-Salmon, or however your name is pronounced, Milano got second place with their deck at the regionals. Kelly said it was tier 1.5 in his meta tier list video. And you will be correct. However, take a look at what ritual monsters are even being used. Only Doombroker and Illusion of Chaos are used. It doesn't feel like a deck with a ritual monster taking center stage. Instead, it feels more like just any other deck that can churn out 6 negates only if it was uninterrupted. Regardless of whether Doombroker alone makes the deck shine, the issue lies with the other 3 ritual monsters being disregarded. Firestarter and Fireburst are centered around making a strong boss monster that cannot be destroyed by battle, by card effects, and cannot be banished. Mystic Girl provides targeting protection and blanks a card for the turn, which is nice if it was summoned on the opponent's turn.
Skedaddle, skedoodle! Your dick is now a noodle!
Sadly, these effects are niche or require specific setups to be put off effectively. While consistency is one part of the solution, the other is that the summoned ritual monster must have strong effects to be worthwhile using, even after accounting for the huge cost required when summoning a ritual monster. Now that we know what makes a good ritual archetype, we can now move on to the recent trends to understand the direction that the ritual summoning mechanic is heading towards. I'll be looking at the trends starting from January 2016, as that was when both pre-prep was released and when the first spell card that was not a ritual spell was used to perform a ritual summon. This date marked a clear turning point when Konami wanted to change how ritual monsters were played and change how powerful they can be. For the positive changes, Konami is definitely improving ritual summoning itself. Incantations, Megaliths, and Drytrons all sought to solve the underlying issue of ritual summoning, which is a Herculean task of gathering a ritual spell, a ritual monster, and a tribute for the ritual summon. Konami has now allowed ritual spells to serve more than one named ritual monster and be used to summon multiple monsters from one archetype instead. The graveyard and deck is steadily becoming a staple source of tributes for ritual summons as well. There is also the occasional card that brings out the ritual monster back from the graveyard or even out from the deck. Ignoring Megaliths, there is a small number of ritual monsters capable of summoning monsters on their own. There are also more ritual monsters with effects that search out cards. Konami has also adapted ritual monsters to be more inclined towards negating as a form of removal, although this is at the cost of other forms of removal such as destroying or banishing. However, there are still some worrying trends. There is still an increasing size of ritual monsters with effects that only activate during the battle phase, or effects that primarily increase the attack or defense stat. This is still good to close out games, but it should be kept to one monster per ritual archetype to avoid another Warrock situation. There is also a huge lack of overall protection directly from ritual monsters, whether it is protection from battle, from targeting, or from effect destruction. Konami is still cautious about giving ritual monsters effects that activate in the hand, as they are still playing it safe after evaluating the consistency and power that Necros enjoys. Graveyard effects are still primarily floating effects after being destroyed by the opponent, with exceptions only being Cyber Angels, Vendreads, and Nephis. Ritual spells are having fewer utility in the graveyard. Cards that have the ability to recycle themselves, like Gishki Aqua Mirror, are severely limited. Another thing I have noticed is that Konami has been adding a lot more spells and traps that perform ritual summons, even though they are not ritual spells. There are also only 115 ritual monsters and 88 spells or traps that summon ritual monsters. More than half of those ritual monsters were released after January 2016. It indicates that Konami is beginning to experiment with this summoning mechanic, but the low total says that Konami should do more. As much as I would like rituals to be much better, my prediction going forward is that Konami has become cautious due to Drytron and would keep rituals much weaker as compared to other decks. Konami will likely create another ritual archetype in an attempt to solve the inherent issue of rituals, much like what Incantations, Megaliths, and Drytron tried to solve. However, I do not think that archetype will be Mikanko, but another archetype in a year's time. I have two predictions on what Mikanko would end up being, one being a reasonable guess and the other being a very optimistic guess. The reasonable guess is that the archetype would either be a plant or spellcaster archetype that will still use a ritual spell for ritual summons. The archetype would likely be waifu bait and perform extremely underwhelming, just like the Rika archetype did in Secret Slayers.
I asked for Sprite and they gave me clown juice.
However, a very optimistic guess would be Konami creating a ritual archetype that once again attempts to solve the lingering problem of rituals. This guess is mainly based on the teaser blurb where the archetype advanced through a mysterious dance. The archetype would still be plant or spellcaster focused, but will lack a ritual spell this time and use a searchable field spell or continuous spell to ritual summon instead. It will likely be as successful as Libromancers is in the TCG and be niche in some form. Following my guesses, I do have a wishlist of 3 things I hope to see in the future. The first is to see a ritual archetype that will banish cards face down. The second thing on my wishlist is for a ritual deck to have an archetypal pre-prep.
If this effect is tied to a monster, the monster itself may be able to gather all 2 cards needed for a ritual summon. While it may sound broken, ritual decks need all the help you can get from Konami.
The third thing on my wishlist is for a ritual deck to not require a tribute at all, or like Rika, provide an additional benefit if you were to use a tribute. Ritual Forgone is a spell card that allows you to summon a ritual monster from your hand without tributing, although it would not be considered a ritual summon. It would be interesting to see an archetype incorporate this long forgotten card. If you have come this far into the video, I would like to thank you for listening to me ramble on about my favorite summoning mechanic in Yu-Gi-Oh! If you would like to see me do more of this content, please leave a comment, a like, and maybe subscribe. Rituals are a nostalgic part of Yu-Gi-Oh! Just as much as Dark Magician or Blue Eyes have been. I wish that Konami would treat rituals just as well as they have done for the 2 iconic archetypes. But that would just be a pipe dream. I just have one last phrase to let Konami know just how much I love this summoning mechanic and want it to grow. Konami, make rituals great again. Hi, welcome to this section of the video. While I was editing for this video, they released new Prediction Princess support. And I'm going to review it because it's kind of related to my video itself. They released a effect monster, a ritual monster, and a ritual spell. The new effect monster, main effect is probably going to be its ability to search a ritual monster and a ritual spell, so a pre-prep on legs. The issue, however, is that it's a flip effect. Not because it's a flip specifically, but because you need to put it on the field. And the problem is that in order to put it on the field, you need to tribute it. In order to tribute it, you need to have the ritual spell and the ritual monster in the first place. So you come into this chicken and egg problem where you need to get the ritual monster, ritual spell, and ritual tribute in order to get the ritual spell and the ritual monster again. So it's a huge problem for ritual decks if you give this kind of support. So it ends up becoming a good advantage pushing card, an extender of recovery, but it's not a good card that allows you to start your entire deck, your entire engine. They also have this protection, but I personally believe that this kind of protection should be on the ritual monsters themselves. But I guess because this archetype is focused on flip and the new ritual monster is a flip, they probably have to put the support on some other cards instead. And speaking of the flip monster, they unveiled a new ritual monster, which is a flip monster. And its effects are quite generic for flip decks in general. So, which is the identity of Prediction Princess, which is nice. Also, another thing that is good is that it must be ritual summon. So it cannot be monster reborn from the graveyard. And also, it's benefiting directly from Terror Tray. So you need to play Terror Tray alongside with this card in order to bring it back from the graveyard. Which solidifies that this card is designed for the archetype specifically and not meant to be generic ritual support. The ritual spell itself is has 2 good things. The first good thing is that it's right now generic, you can summon either territory or the new ritual monster, and it allows you to bring it back from the graveyard and in either face up attack or face down defense. So first one benefiting territory, and this one allowing the flip ritual monster to benefit from to allow it to be face down to use the flip effect. There's also a graveyard effect, but the huge issue with this card right now is that it is not benefiting from pre-prep. The deck currently already is able to run pre-prep because of territory, the initial territory ritual spell and territory herself. So if your deck is already running that card, might as well give this card pre-prep as well. What I would like to compare to is Ventrats, where all 3 ritual spells are generic. They can summon any Ventrat ritual monster, but 2 of them are pre-prep compatible. They can search for Slayer and the new ritual monster. So the deck itself benefits very, very greatly from pre-prep, and they have Scarf Ventrat to allow searching for the very first ritual spell already. So overall, it's good support, I guess. Okay to good support, but not extremely good support that allows Prediction Princess to benefit and get their engine started, because they are still reliant on the very first flip search, either from the old Prediction Princess that allows them to search ritual spell, or they have to find a way to put this card on the field to search for the ritual spell. So what does this mean for my prediction for Mikanko? I would think that it will stay the same, either barely playable, or else it will be niche in some form like Libromancers. I would think that their power level wouldn't be that high because as you can see from the support that they are releasing, they are still limiting the power level of rituals as a whole. There are some effects that they can give back, like hand effects, but doesn't seem like they'll be too keen on releasing this kind of effects anytime soon. Of course, I would like Konami to prove me wrong, but I don't think that they will be coming anytime soon.
I forgot to record a conclusion. I hope you have learned a thing or two about how Konami is treating the ritual summoning mechanic recently. Just a reminder to check the description below for the link to a Google Drive document containing a catalogue of all ritual monsters and cards that facilitates ritual summoning, if you are interested. And on that note,